Hello, today we look at a game played between myself and Alan Wickering, also in that December Lansing Mini-Swiss. And the game began with 1d4, knight f6, c4, e6, knight to f3, and b6, which introduces the Queen's Indian defense. And I know that in this opening, Black really wants to establish firm control over the e4 square. So I thought, because I also wanted to have control over the square, if I want to fight back for it, I need to make a move like a3 to keep his dark square bishop out of the position from pinning my knight to my king. So anyway, that's how the game begins. He plays bishop out, I play knight out, and he played immediately knight to e4. And I went ahead and captured that knight, threatened the bishop, and played my pawn to e4, which I thought at the time was a good idea. And the way the game went, I was actually happy with the way my center and everything got shaped. But an interesting move here would have been maybe like queen to f6 to put pressure on my d4 pawn that's not guarded currently, and also maybe to get me to be tempted to push e5 early on, where that bishop then gets a lot of life. So in the game, though, Alan played d5, and I captured my c pawn, and we get this structure. And so this, with the pawns pointed towards the king side there, I'm going to have a king side attack in this game, and it's going to feel kind of natural. And then, of course, because his light squared bishop's behind that center pawn, it's going to be more out of the action as all this stuff happens. So in the game here, I played queen to h5, but a neat variation would have been if I would have pushed this pawn forward, and we can consider moves for Black here, like maybe pawn takes pawn, and then if I push forward again, there's kind of a neat trap here where if this pawn were to capture, g takes f6, then just to catch up, then there's this idea of queen checks, and the king, moves over, queen to f5, and mates. There's not really a good way to stop mate on h7, so that's pretty much a game right there. So that would have been a neat way to play it. But in the game, I played queen to h5, and Alan played g6, queen into h6, and then f5 immediately. Now, of course, I could try to continue my kingside attack and maybe capture this pawn, but I really like, for an endgame, the fact that I already have a passed pawn here on the e-file. So I decided to leave things locked up, and part of me is kind of assuming that my pieces can kind of navigate their way in and maybe break through on the king side here. But Alan actually finds a lot of really good defensive resources here. We can watch him kind of flip his pieces around. He's going to be dancing his pieces from e8 here, f8, d7. They're going to move around in a pretty nice way to give some good protection to his pieces. So queen into e6, and I play my king over, just rook up, and then bishop down. And then here, this knight move, multifaceted as it is, actually adds support here, but it also guards the queen. So Black here has actually got ideas maybe of like g5 with queens coming off the board. So seeing that, I went ahead and played queen to h3 to avoid the exchange of queens, and Alan played c4, just, challenging my bishop, so I moved back. And then you notice how he's getting this queenside expansion, and this actually does matter a lot because he's working towards getting a passed pawn over there for the endgame. So I play my bishop out, we exchange my bad bishop for his good one, and then actually this next move here, his knight really has me tied down. His knight attacks d4, it attacks f4, and it just seems very powerful. It's holding the position quite well. So I realize my queen's kind of tied to the f4 pawn, my knight's tied to the d4 pawn, so I play rook to d2 just to be able to move a piece again. And Alan plays a5. Then I play knight over to h4, and Alan plays his king over to get out of the tactic there that I was threatening with maybe knight or bishop takes f5 with the king on g8, so he gets out of the way of that. And then I play rook up, and now here there's a tactic in this position that can be played, and Alan did that, but unfortunately the result of these captures after knight takes f4, although he does get back the piece, I capture the pawn on f5 first, and I capture his rook, play my rook over, and you can see how my pieces are playing quite well together here. My bishop has pressure all the way down to h7, my queen and rook are on this open file, and for the sacrifice that he's done, he's kind of removed a blockader, and we talked about this after the game, Alan and I, and the fact that maybe he shouldn't have gone into that, because that knight was really well placed in e6, and also those pawns that were on, let's go back here, those pawns that were on g6 and f5, were also doing a great job holding my pieces out, and maybe he could focus more on his queenside expansion that way. So anyway, queen to g5 was played, h3, and then now I go in and threaten mate, so he blocks. And now that pawn comes forward, and so the next few moves kind of lead us towards an endgame where it seems like I might be queening first, so bishop back, and now everything's getting pretty rough for black here. You can't move the bishop, because the bishop moves after rook takes rook, this pawn will queen. So he's a bit tied up here, so he pushes his pawn forward, and he goes after this his own passed pawn on that side of the board, bishop back to b1. And now he begins to have ideas of his own of coming back into the game, and this is actually a really important move, king to g1. We'll see why in a moment, but rook takes, and then here after I capture, he abandons his original idea. So the original idea here for black would be rook checks, king up, and then rook takes bishop, and then there's this idea that wherever my rook moves, he might have a real quick rook here check, followed by pawn queens, but unfortunately in this variation I can play my rook over here, and when my king captures his rook on the check attempt, then my rook will be able to stop his pawn, and my pawn's going to queen, so this is completely not good for Alan. So Alan played, after rook takes e8, he plays rook to e3 because he sees that that variation isn't going to work out for him anymore. And now it's just a matter of a technical win with a rook and bishop versus a rook. So I'll just play through these moves so you can see them, but the most challenging part of the game, I would say, at this point is over. You know, I got the bishop versus the rook, and eventually I'll get my rook in behind a pawn and push that pawn forward, and that'll be the end of the game. So right about here, I get that set up, and there's really not much left to hope for here. And so in this position, Alan went ahead and resigned the game. So it was a good game. He did a lot of really great defensive moves in the game, and it was unfortunate that the sacrifice knight takes f4, which initially he said he thought was going to win him a pawn, actually ended up not winning a pawn and also bringing to life my pieces on a side of the board that I was attacking on. So overall it was a good game, and hope you enjoyed watching it. Look forward to seeing you soon.